What up? We're back. Protect your deck. I'm with the homies. Wes Tuck. No hot sauce this time, thank God. No hot sauce, just a normal podcast. How you guys doing?
Chilling.
Doing pretty good. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I don't know when this is going to get... That's what I'm saying, dude. Protect your deck. Oh my God, dude. July 4th. Again, we can't have a Wu-Tang based podcast without mentioning this. If you are... just go to Wu-Tang July 4th. We'll all be there. Everyone on this show will be there.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
Wu-Tang!
I don't know when this is going to release, but we got some things coming up. Next week is SCGCon.
That is correct. Next weekend.
And then it's
April 11th and 12th.
And then it's PQ Plus like crazy. Pro Tour like crazy in Colorado. We got like 75 events.
Yeah, we got like 6, 7, 8 events, something like that. Yeah, end of April, I think, right? End of April, early May.
And then right into Nats like shortly after that.
A month or so until then, because I think the Pro Tour is also this coming up weekend. And then May 27th, there is a banned and restricted announcement, which I actually talked about in my video. Shout out that video if you're going to watch it, Meta Mondays with me.
Yeah, Meta Mondays!
Hell yeah.
But yeah, I made some predictions in that video. I think maybe we'll see a couple hits, but who knows, especially with the new set coming out early June with the US Nats as well. So we'll see what happens.
Yo, you know what though?
Prediction. Unban Crown Seeds.
That's not happening. I was gonna say, do you have any?
You can't fault me for trying.
Do you have any predictions? We could see if you were right, because neither of those videos are released yet. Do you have any predictions for bands?
Yes. So one of the predictions I made for my band is that I think that so first of all, if Aurora gets hit at all, I think it'll be either Flicker Wisp or Electromagnetic Somersault are the first two cards I mentioned. Electromagnetic Somersault has already been hit, or I won't go too into it, but Electromagnetic Somersault has already been hit, mostly because of Starvo being degenerate, but the card is just really good. I know Tuck is kind of in agreement with this. He's repeated this.
It should be a Majestic.
Times.
It reads like a Majestic. It should be red.
Yeah. And then I think they could hit Flicker Wisp as well. I think I've mentioned this to you guys in passing several times, where it's kind of what makes your matchup so good. And then I think also with the Pirate set coming out and the emphasis on gold in that set, that it would make a lot of sense for them to hit Crown of Dominion.
All right, well, you guys heard it. If Wes is wrong, he's doing the bomb again.
I don't know about all that. I do have one more as well. I also mentioned that if they do hit Aurora, I think it's likely that they also hit one of the 9 generic 0-for-4 defense reactions. Probably FAT for Scene or Sync Below.
If it's Shelter, I'll lose it. I just donated one of my organs to get my place at a Shelter. If they nerf...
I'm pretty sure it would be FAT or Sync, but who knows?
I hope they don't get rid of FAT. We can talk about it later on today's topic, but I think the opting on FAT is very valuable in a macro sense.
Okay.
I agree. So I think Sync Below would be a very good hit, because it hits the consistency of some of those decks, and it one of the reasons Sync Below is so good is that if you're running 9 defense reactions, you can sync another defense reaction if you're not going to be able to convert that second one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be a very smart hit, a very heads-up hit from LSS, especially with James White going on record, if I recall correctly, saying that he doesn't particularly like this sort of defense reaction heavy state we found ourselves in. But
yeah, they said that and then they released Shelter, so...
True, yeah. Fair.
This is like a perfect
tech for Flick Knives, but...
It's so good, though, that card. Especially when you illegally play it from Arsenal with the instant. Like I tried to do against Wes last night when he beat me in the Armory. Yeah, it's real good when you do that. Shout out to Justin for catching that, bro. Come on.
Yeah, you did it real slick. I didn't even notice.
No, just real quick. You just got to throw it real quick out of the Arsenal, and then it looks like it came from your hand. That's a good... So, the Sync Below FAT, you guys don't know yet, but it's a perfect segue into what today's topic is. And today's topic is going to be 2 parts, which they're not really connected, but the episodes would be too short if we did it. So, we're going to do 2 parts today. The first part's going to be, we're going to talk about value. And we're going to talk about if it's, like, overrated. Is the term value thrown out too much? Do people reference it too much? What is it? Should you have to pay attention to it? I have my views on the idea of value, and when I first came and played Flesh and Blood, it was this thing that everyone talked about, and I felt like such a noob that I didn't have like a good grasp on what value was. And then I was like, continued playing and did okay, and I was like, does this matter? And I think the answer is sometimes, which I think should be the answer. We're going to talk about that. And then the second part is going to be when you bring a deck to a tournament or an armory, should you be bringing a deck that asks a question, or should you be bringing a deck that answers a question? And we're going to dive into that. So let's jump into the value talk. When we talk about value, very, very broad. Like, if you were going to explain to someone that, is it just like, Tuck, for you, would you say that value is just like the way that we can assign like how good a card is, or like a baseline of how we can start discussing cards, or like how did this
I would start from the broadest terms before we even ask ourselves like, what is Flesh and Blood, how is Flesh and Blood played. I think we need to address that inherently card games are built around numbers. It's just sort of the nature of the game itself. It's a balancing mechanic. And secondly, whether it's Flesh and Blood or some other game, we're trying to play a game that touts itself as being skill-based, has lots of little decisions that add up and sort of have consequences when you're not prepared for everything. So I think, regardless of how you calculate value, regardless of how much you weigh value, I think I would define the role of value with games like this as a tool that you can use to get better. So when Wes and I started playing the game, years and years ago, we would start playing a game, one of us would lose, and we'd immediately jump to, oh, well, if I had known about this, if you had done that. And I think it's once you get past that surface level and you start really getting to learn a deck more in like the deeper nitty-gritty details, being able to evaluate something and put a number on it really helps you weigh the decision of, should I go with this line or that line in a micro versus macro sense, etc. So I think at its core, I would say valuing and putting numbers to certain lines and decisions is a tool to
evaluate,
influence your decision making.
Okay, cool.
So that you can become a better player.
I love it.
Or at least have discussions of why something is good and why something is bad, or why they could both be good, but why one might be better.
Okay, I love it. And if you're watching this and you want a good video on the nitty-gritty on how cards are evaluated or rated and evaluated, and there, we're going to drop a link. Nathan Crawford does an amazing job on that video that there's no need for anyone else to kind of do another video on how to rate or look at the value of cards, because he does
it perfectly, very succinctly.
Perfect.
It's called Learning Curve. 3 episodes only. It's very quick. We will drop the link.
The first episode is on value, and it is amazing. It is amazing. Mm-hmm. For those who want the TLDR, or if you didn't watch that and you don't really know value, what's like the average card? We look at like a value of 3. An example I like to, or it's 3, right? An example I like to look at that's like very, very simple. Let me pull over I'm just going to cover someone's face with this. Let me pull over my 0 to 60 deck. I'm just going to cover Tuck for a second. Here's 0 to 60 red. Here's 0 to 60 yellow. Here's blue. They all block for 3. This one hits for 2. This one hits for 3. This one hits for 4. You want to send the one for 4 because you get 1 more point of value than if you block with it for 3. The yellow one, you don't care. You can block with it or send it for 3. You get the same value on the card. And the blue one you want to block with and you don't want to send, because if you send it for 2, you get 1 point less of value than if you block for 3. This is like the easiest example I can think of. Just so that we are all kind of caught up. Well, go watch that video. Welcome back from the Nathan Crawford video on value. So the reason I wanted to have this conversation is because especially when I first started playing Flesh and Blood, this term value came up, and then you go to the Purple Discord and you start talking to people about value or card choices, and you hear why is this card good? Well, it's above rate, and that's where people start. And then I would find that some players, when they were playing or I'm playing, they're, why would you do that line? It's below rate. And I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? What are you talking about? This is what my hand does, or this is the best thing I could do with my hand, or the context of the game. And then I started to do this deep dive on value because I felt like an idiot because I didn't really know what people were talking about. And I felt like the more that I uncovered, the less it mattered, or the more it contextually mattered. The reason I wanted to bring you guys on is because, one, you guys know more about the game than I do, but two, Tuck, you know a lot. You're one to very quickly value cards or put the rate on cards, and I know that it helps sometimes. So, can you focus too much on value? Like, is this something that, how important do you think it is actually in the game of Flesh and Blood? And I know we're gonna dive into like certain contexts, but like, do you think this is something that some players lean on too much, some players don't lean on enough? If you are watching this and you don't really know value, how important is it in Flesh and Blood?
I think you already said the magic word, context. I think everything is contextual, and this is why I was saying earlier that we can all calculate numbers. I'm sure everyone watching this video already hit pause, went and watched Nathan Crawford, and is back here, so we could all agree on how to calculate numbers on a baseline, like the numbers on the card, this card for this card. So we can all then arrive at looking at 4 cards what the most damage you can push is. So if you're like an aggro deck, like Aurora, and you know we're never, ever, ever going to turn 2, then yeah, value is pretty important, because if you could send 18, but instead you send 16, and you get down to 1-1, maybe you threw the game because you didn't give them everything you had. So I think it's all contextual, but like less so on the player and more so on the deck that you're playing and the deck that you're playing against too. So for example, if you're Dio against an Aurora, same deal. You want all gas, no brakes, the absolute most you can push with every hand. It's just pure math. But if you're Dio against Florian, that really just flips on its head, right? And suddenly you might be sending lower numbers to preserve, to pitch stack, to maybe I'll shuffle and this will come back up. Oh, this didn't line up with the power card. There's all these other considerations where juicing things right here, right now might not be the answer. And I think that really depends on if you're playing an aggro deck, a mid-range deck, a control deck, and then what your matchup that you're currently in is as well. So in a nutshell, I think that value, again, it's very important, but is very far from the end-all be-all, and it's all contextual.
Yeah, it sounds like what you were kind of hinting at there is there's a idea of a micro management of your resources or your value versus like a macro game plan into particular matchups.
Exactly.
So pretty important in Flesh and Blood is your matchups, like Tuck was kind of hinting at there.
So you both agree that like value is more or less important based on the deck you're playing and the deck you're playing against?
For the most part, I think you need to be able to calculate value regardless. So if I'm playing Florian, I can obviously say that, well, if I, play a red Autumn's Touch, that's a 2-card 7, or if I E-Strike into the Autumn's Touch, so now do I block with the E-Strike in the card I would bottom versus sending... Then you get into the context of, well, how important is pushing their life totals so that both of our life totals go down versus blocking so that both of our life totals stay up? Which one do I actually want more for where I'm currently... And that's where you start getting into it, but it all starts with that Nathan Crawford video of how do we do the basic math. And I think that if you don't even know how to evaluate what's in your hand, then I don't think you have the tools capable of moving past that to derive the correct answers and have the discussion of why they're correct or why there is no correct answer here, but the 2 options are worth considering, sort of thing. But so I do think value is important. It's just not the deciding factor. It's one of the tools to get to where you're going.
Is it harmful if you over-focus on it? Could it be?
If you're not an aggro going balls to the wall, then yes. If you are an aggro going balls to the wall, Wes can correct me, but I would say that's when it is most correct to just hard focus on the math.
I think your example of, if we go back to your 0 to 60 example, if you just do the raw math on presenting a 0 for 1 go again card, you burn 2 cards from your deck and you get 1 point of value essentially. In a vacuum, that is terrible. You never want to be in that spot. However, if you all of a sudden you are throwing a pulse wave harpoon or you're throwing a maximum velocity, now it's a different equation. Similarly, if you are playing against a fatigue deck, then maybe, some of those smaller attacks could be worthwhile just to throw at the end of the chain with no go again. It just sort of depends. I think nothing in Flesh and Blood is in a vacuum, and not even aggro. Like, for example, last night at the Armory, there was a turn cycle where you had a Rage Spectre out and were attacking me, and I had a Burn Up Shock and Arsenal. I was trying to teach one of our other locals sort of how to think about your turns as Aurora, so we were just kind of like thinking through it together. What I ended up doing was playing it out from Arsenal for 1 point of value while you were attacking with Rage Spectre and no floating and no cards. Now, in a vacuum, it kind of seems like, okay, I just played Burn Up for only the shock part since I'm playing it on your turn at instant speed for 1 value. But what actually happened was I killed your ward and effectively blocked 6 because I killed your 6 power attack. And now all of a sudden I have more breathing room at the end of the game where I had just drawn like several whiff hands of 4 instants, which was kind of hilarious. But you know, you can kind of get the idea of even in aggro, just raw numbers is not always the correct way to do it. Especially Burn Up Shock, going back to that card. It can be a 0 for 1, sort of at its baseline, if you don't hit. However, you can force your opponent to interact with you by presenting them an on-hit. You're introducing a area for your opponent to sort of play the way you want them to, and kind of not only the way you want them to, but maybe the way you expect them to. So if I play a Burn Up Shock and I'm playing against Enigma and they don't have a board state or anything, I'm probably expecting you to block because you don't want to eat that Burn Up Shock to the face. And that's a really big part of aggro decks, is these on hits that maybe, you know, don't quite present value one way or the other, but just by virtue of me making you interact with me, I have derived some extra value there in some ways.
This is what Nathan Crawford calls positive disruption, whereas something like a discard effect would be negative disruption. One hit I draw, he would call positive disruption because it forces the blocks regardless.
But it's I mean that example is perfect because again, if you heard that, that doesn't mean every single time your opponent throws a Rage Spectre and you have Burn Up Shock to like pop it like that. Wes was able to squeeze a ton more value out of a card, but what if my health total was lower and he has a 5-card play where he's like, oh my god, he cannot block around this. This could hit and get me more value offensively than defensively, and now I'm doing the thing that I need to do in that turn, right? And
then when we get into the literal math too, you're evaluating, well, if there's no way you can block this, you've done the math on what you can present, and so then you're subtracting the 6 that you're taking from the Rage Spectre into this equation. Again, just factoring in the context of it to see in the current moment how correct is it compared to, obviously, if I wasn't being attacked by a Rage Spectre or if it was something else.
Yeah, which is interesting because I also think that there's some people that want to play, they want to take this value idea and then squeeze any advantage out that they can, where like if I understand value more, so like let's take the same example that we just had. There might be a player that's like, okay, let me Super Saiyan Rain Man calculate the amount of value if I do it this way versus if I do it this way versus if I do it this way, and might just do the thing that yields the best number. But that's not always like the most correct. You might need to do the play that gives you less value because of the game state. And I think in aggro decks that's the most important. Because if you look at Katsu, like back when I was playing it, everything, now that I know what, you know, on rate and value is, everything Katsu does is below rate. His cards are horribly inefficient.
And then you get into the discussion of, well, is the rate added by his hero ability?
Or dishonor.
Don't trigger, but you're threatening, so even though they never actually do the thing, they kind of are... Yeah, but I think this all kind of goes hand in hand with the macro-micro thing, which maybe I'm getting ahead of the...
No, it's interesting because... I just see a lot of when I'm on the Purple Discord a lot. I'm an idiot and I need to do as much research as possible. So I go through a lot of bad information to find the hidden gems. Right? And what I do see across the board is people almost overusing this idea of value to justify a card. Why do you use this card? Well, first, it's above rate, where it's like, and we're going to get to this because you mentioned that the value is more important with specific deck you're playing, specific deck your opponent's playing, the context of the game. My next question, before we're not going to get there yet, but the next question is value more important in different formats? And when we talk about classic constructed in a card game, I don't think anyone wants to play a card game that is only value based, because now you can. I got my Steam notifications up. That's fine. Because that game does not sound like a lot of fun for a card game. If it's just math, you can have two robots play and the outcome would almost always be the same. With constructed, your deck is trying to tell a story. So let's go back to the Katsu example, where it's like, sure, everything Katsu does is below rate, but if I land this dishonor and I can do it in a sneaky way, maybe I go below rate on every single card I play, but then dishonor hits and I just won the game. Card games are like that. Your deck is trying to do something very powerful. That's usually a good CC deck, right? So it's constructed in a way that you can do that. And sometimes doing things that are below rate gets you there, or making these weird plays that, if you were just looking at it in a vacuum of math, that play sucked. But then it's like, but I'm able to do this thing. And that's why it was such a foreign concept to me, because I could not have played a deck that was more outside of what value is than Katsu, and that just happened on accident.
Now that you've been playing Enigma, I think you may or may not agree with me here, but I would say to any player watching this who is like, yeah, I know how to do math, but past that, I'm not really getting what you guys are saying. I'm one of those people who just goes for the best math, typically. My recommendation would be to find the best deck that appeals to you that goes to cycle 2 consistently and play that for several weeks. Whether that's Florian or some Guardian, even though Guardian's bad right now, just find a deck that will consistently play more defensively and get to cycle 2 and start considering the value in that deck, and you will learn a lot. The example that I kind of always think of for myself is like channel the Millennium Tree in Florian. There are games where you don't expect to play it out, but you get to play it out early game, and the value can be really good. Obviously, you can calculate, based on the arcane damage versus how many cards spent, the number value there. But regardless, there are games where you will play it early, and you chip them down early, and then you're playing in the context of, well, I got 20 damage kind of for free, and now we're here. And on the flip side, you'll play other games where you see one really, really early, where you're like, I don't even have an Earth card and Banish. I want to put this early on the start of my second cycle, draw it back, and now you get back where you know that that's there. You play the whole game in the context of, the first card of my second cycle is this tree. So here's some physical, and they get down to like 15. And then you hit it, and you know that the 3 arcane value is not 3 value, but now it's actually lethal, which then rephrase. It's all contextual. I keep coming back to the C word, but it's almost how you eke the value out of these cards. The numbers can be very deceptive, especially in multi-cycle games, which is why I was saying earlier, I think macro versus micro is a big consideration in the same discussion of how are you calculating value and how are you weighing the value of certain cards in certain decks.
I'm not mad that we're using the C word a lot, because I think that was like, I didn't have a point to get across with this episode. I was really interested in having this discussion with you guys, because I think Wes and I play more similar decks. So we come from the like, well, I'm not playing totally on value, it's on feel and stuff like that. And then when you have, just trying to center my camera, when you have Tuck, you do the value thing much better, which is a perfect segue into, does it matter more in certain formats?
There are other formats?
We're about to play some in nets.
Yeah.
And I think I know the answer to
own discussion for this. I think we can briefly touch on Blitz and say that when the game has the life totals cut in half, but all the damage numbers and blocking numbers stay the same, things get wonky and they get really fast. And now we have Crown of Seeds back in Blitz because they were like, oops, things got too aggro, let's try and balance it out. I don't know. So yeah, it's very different.
Well, let's say what about sealed and draft? Like specifically like where you're not crafting your deck,
I'll tee it up for Wes and say I think Limited and Flesh and Blood is really interesting because especially in like set to set, the way that you evaluate cards is so drastically different that to me at least that's the distinction between each sets when I look back about all the Flesh and Blood sets we've been around for, is how they feel in Limited so distinct from each other, and a lot of that is how we're calculating value. What do you think about Limited and value?
Limited is sort of an interesting format because not only is value quite important, but it's more difficult to in a game of draft or even limited if you're playing limited, it's more difficult to actually convert your hand frequently. Now think about the term draft chaff. Why do people call certain cards draft chaff? Because they're generally only used in draft because they're just bad otherwise. So that's like when you're drafting, you're getting these cards that are not amazing. So you're having to sort of look at these cards in different angles. Like, how can I use this to convert my 4-card hand in offense? How can I use this to maybe make a little mini combo? Or how can I use this combat trick to leverage this other card in my deck? Things become a lot more odd because you're not just pre-constructing a deck, obviously. You're working with sort of what you're given or what you've chosen, I guess, to some extent. So I would say value is very important in limited, arguably more important than in CC simply because the game is shorter. Every little point of value you can eke out is extra important. Now, the fact that fatigue is a major consideration in limited, much more so than CC, I would say these days. You don't only look at just the raw value numbers. Frequently, you'll have to make these macro decisions of like, okay, I can pitch this card this turn for my weapon, and I know later in the game I'll draw this 4-card hand that I pitch stacked and be able to convert this hand by buying myself space or something like that. Like, I know this card will buy me space, so I'll pitch it with this hand that will let me play it out, block with these 3 cards, play it out, buy myself space, and then I have this next gas 4-card hand that'll convert really well offensively. Like, those sort of things do happen in CC, but it's much less likely that you will make it to those board states because it's much less likely you'll go to cycle 2 because we have these aggro decks like Aurora, like Syndra, like FI, like Zen that can just end the game before you get to second cycle.
So we agree that it's probably more important when you are playing cards that might be bad to squeeze the value out of them in a format like draft or sealed.
Mm-hmm. And I want to build up that with one more thing too, and say that a lot of the time in these limited decks that you end up with, you kind of have like 1 or 2 bombs that become your win condition, where you go, I can certainly win if I just chip or do this other thing, but like, for example, when I won Battle Hardened Dallas against Florin, it was Annihilator Engine. He gave me an Annihilator Engine, I was tech low, he was maxed, I'm like 9 overpower is my win con. And then he stripped it out of my hand and forced me to block with lethal damage, and I went, oh shit. So then suddenly, a red Backet Protocol, the value, I don't care what the number is, I don't care what anyone says that number is, the value is I can win the game.
This is what yes.
So important because of, specifically it was to get my win con, which is like the infinite value card. So it's like, again, it's all contextual, right? But yeah I do think in a nutshell, limited evaluation is very different. It relies much more on just fundamentals, and again, fundamentals and calculating basic value go hand in hand in Flesh and Blood. They're kind of the core of the game. Every single point matters in most games of Flesh and Blood, but especially when you have 20 or less life compared to 40.
We should do you guys talked a lot about a lot of the things that we've been doing behind the scenes with draft, and we need to do an episode on how to approach drafting a new set, specifically because it will be what you guys are doing in Nats, and we'll be doing it as a team to practice anyway. I think it's very important. Plus, the scrubs like myself who didn't qualify for Nats can learn a lot on how to draft when it happens. I will be in sealed, and I will be valuing my ass off at Vegas at the sealed at the calling. I'll be like Rain Man, like I said, just.
I cannot wait to have discussions on how to value cards with Necromancer. When Dromai first came out and Dragons were a thing, I think Wes was there, I don't know, but I think it took Dromai like a set or 2 before people played her and went, this is a good deck, and I figured out why. Because it's just so hard to evaluate how easy or not it is to play out a dragon, then how many times do I swing with it, the attacks that you send. It's just like value all over the place, and you could have dissertations and big arguments where like no one's really wrong, and eventually people all sort of, after having more time in the oven, found what works, found what doesn't, and I'm really, really excited to revisit that with Necromancer, and I hope that everyone will help me along that journey, because with Nats so close to the Necro release, it's going to be really daunting. I bet the Necro builds are going to be all over the place at Nats. That's kind of my prediction. I don't know if it's going to top, I don't know if it'll be good or bad, but they'll be so wildly different.
Yeah. I mean, It's interesting because it's like, how do you put a value on like Mirror Guy?
Exactly.
What if it stays
You
out
got,
for
like,
2 turns?
different cascadings.
What-
Yeah, but
yeah.
there's also this and there's this. It's just hard math to calculate as opposed to one card that sends 7.
You guys touched on a couple of things that I want to just briefly discuss, then we could kind of go on to the asking question topic, because again, I just think this is like a very high level discussion of value, but for me selfishly, it's one of those things that when I first started playing, like I said, I didn't have a good grasp on it, and then when I didn't have a good grasp on it, I was like, am I getting lucky? Is that why I'm winning? I don't know. I'm not really thinking about this, but then the more I dove into what it was, the more I was actually thinking about it. I just wasn't tying the word value and raid. It's like, you know, of course, if you have a card that swings for 10 and blocks for 1, you don't want to block with that card, but sometimes you have to, or sometimes you get disrupted. Wes brought up a really good point, and you actually brought up Dio, on like how a 0 for 1 is really bad, but also could be good sometimes. If I bring up my insane, if I cover Tuck again, I bring up my insane 3-0 to 60 deck. I have this card in the maybe section. Hanabe Blaster. Why I like this example is because if I throw all 3 of these cards, I put a counter on Hanabi, right? If I put a counter on Hanabi, we can say that that's 2.5 points of value because 2 counters and I punch you for 5, or I send 5. So it makes your shitty blues a little bit better. And Wes, you were kind of talking about that in with your draft example. It's like how you have to look at very creative ways to add value to these bad cards that you have, which I just thought that was like a very easy example. You know,
I think FI is another deck that sort of does that as well, because you run a lot of these go again draconic actions. I don't know if he's still running them, but like historically, prior to Hunt It, he was running like even some yellows that were just 2, but 2 at face value, not that good. But when you consider that now you've turned on Shuko, that's at least 1 more point of value. Plus, it's a chain link for your getting your Phoenix Flame for free. That's another point of value. So, I mean, you basically just turned a yellow into a red, which is really good. Zen does something very similar with his blues, where they frequently will come in for red value, I'll call it, which is, 3-ish points of value, or more, depending on what the card is. So,
and then if you're running Mask of Momentum, are you making them block inefficiently because they're trying to stop? You know, this is again, it's the C word. It's very contextual. Before we move on to the next thing, the other thing I've seen a lot of people do is they do this deep dive. I used to live out in Jersey, and I was a gambling degenerate growing up around Atlantic City, and I'm an old guy, 37. Back in the day when I was in my young 20s, counting cards in blackjack was like at its peak. And I remember getting involved in doing that and going to a blackjack table. And if you're, this is not a go count cards in blackjack. The casinos have changed the rules so that.
But we know the value.
The casinos have changed the rules so that you never win. Even if you're counting, the house will win. Don't do this. But back then, the casinos had different rules. There was like less decks in the shoe and etc. There was a big conversation to be had because some of the ways and strategies that you can use to count cards got more complicated, but gave you a little bit more of an edge. I see people that kind of try to evaluate their value of these cards, and they do this deep dive in their head, and the more complicated it is, the more you are prone to error. So you could squeeze out that last 0.1% or try to evaluate these cards, but if it means it's fatiguing your brain, or you're going to make misplays because every single time you look at your hand, you're like calculating this crazy like number, you know what I mean? Like that might not be good. The simpler might be better. Don't force yourself to make misplays because
fatigue is so real.
Yeah. Do it the simplest way. Like watch the Nathan Crawford video and then understand that everything is contextual like we're saying, and then just do it in the easiest way that works for you, because if doing the harder strategy is more yield to user error, then you're negating the extra points that you would get anyway.
Right.
I saw it all the time. People would start counting, me and my degenerate gambling friends, and they're like,
you're looking so much here and doing all the math, and you forget. Oh shit! I meant to pop snappies.
Yeah.
Like,
and your opponent could play fast, right? And that's what dealers do. So then they're like, oh fuck, I totally lost the count. Like if we go back to the blackjack thing, it's like, well, you might as well get off the table now because, yeah, like it didn't work. Use like a simpler method. For me, that works for me. So you know what I mean. And I'm one of these more like played for feel, but I think. Taki, I think you were like 1,000% correct. I think once I did the deep dive and I watched that Nathan Crawford video, it instantly made me a better player without even needing to use it, because the hands where it comes up where it's like, oh, like it's an easier way to give you the options, and then you could pick which option is better on the game state.
Yeah, it's just making informed decisions, but you have to be informed.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to have the information. Exactly, definitely.
Yeah, when we talk about, I lied. I said we're going to move on to the next topic, but I have this really cool sync. We talk about sync below and FAB foreseen. This is another reason why I think value sometimes is just overhyped and talked about, right? What's the value on sync below? If you were going to put a value on sync below, is it 4?
It's 4 big ass asterisk.
There, thank you. Because what if you're playing? Okay, what if that sync below is in your arsenal, and you get CNC'd? Right? You're not doing anything, right? You can't do anything with it. What if you use that sync below and you're playing Katsu and you have an all red hand and you draw into a blue that lets you play out your entire hand, where before you couldn't do that? It's like impossible to put like actual value on.
So speaking sync versus FAT a moment, this is something that I've thought about a lot in like more of the macro sense, where a lot of the time that I play out sync below, I do not sync a card. If my hand does something, even if that something is just okay, I do not want to risk it turning into nothing. Even it could be worse, or it could be better. Like I can do the math and say, well, if there's like a 75, I don't care. I'm going to take what I know. Whereas FAT always opts. And if we go back to my Pride and Joy Crown of Seeds, and we said how... I've asked people, okay, what if we took off the damage prevention? What if I could just pay 1, instant, cycle a card? And they said, no, it's still OP. If that is really good, and as we've talked about already, like getting to cycle 2 faster is huge. If you're opting 3 times in a game, you're getting almost 1 full hand into your deck faster. If it's 15 turns now down to 14, that could be a game changer. That is huge, just saying, yep, that's a card, put it on bottom 3 times.
Yeah.
I think that's a value that often people don't even equate, they don't even acknowledge, they just go, yeah, sure, whatever, I did a thing. But that in and of itself can be huge, even if you're not playing a deck where you care what the information was at all. Just always choosing bottom regardless can be massive.
It also always gives you a little bit of information on maybe the next turn, what's coming, what you can do. For instance, I played a FAT against you.
You know it's a bomb, of course you keep it on top.
Yeah, I played FAT against you, Wes, last night, and I had Pummel in hand. I didn't know if I wanted to block with it, if it was going to stay stuck, and then I saw Weakest Link on the top, and I was like, "Oh, okay,
yeah,
okay, we're cooking now."
It's like we were saying.
If you don't know if you are listening to this and you're like, whatever, it's the top card of my deck, I'm going to play 5 games as Dio, and you'll feel the power of just knowing what that next card is. Oh, it's so good. It's so good.
And this is why I'm saying I think FAT is kind of slept on in terms of the raw number value. If Sync is often just a hard 4, and sometimes a 4 plus whatever the fix is, whereas FAT is always a hard 4 and something. Whether it's the knowledge of the top, whether you're choosing bottom every time, it's 4 plus more every single time. So if they banned FAT, and now we just have Sync that I sometimes use, sometimes don't, and Shelter that's like a meta-dependent tech card, I'm kind of sad, because I think FAT weirdly is like kind of the most skill-intensive of the 3. Again, debatable, but I think there's a lot to be said there about the opt, and just getting into value, but we can move on now.
When you sync a card and you draw into the perfect, you're about to die, and you sync the mirror guy that doesn't block into another D-react, and you're like, feels good.
The third D-react into anything that isn't
something that's playable. Yeah. No, Sync's good. Yeah. I like both.
Sync is more about the potential, I think, than the fact that you will do it every time or not.
Yeah,
I think it's just better than FAT because
high highs.
Yeah.
Super up there.
All right, cool. Well, that was great. I mean, I really do. It's like the thesis or the takeaway is value is a tool that you should use so you can ease more contextual, so you can more easily. Oh, we just made a little heart. Value is like this thing where if you understand it, at a very basic level, it will give you the opportunity to find the lines better, and then from there you can decide on the line that you're going to take on the context of the game, the deck that you're playing, things like that. And it's important, but sometimes it's important. And when it's important, sometimes it can be even more important, like if you're doing draft or sealed and stuff like that. So watch that Nathan Crawford video. It will immediately, even if you have been to fucking Worlds, it will immediately make you a better Flesh and Blood player. Like, for real. His videos, that Learning Curve series
is the fundamentals of the game. Love
It's
it
so
or hate
good.
it. That is fundamental FaB 101, is how do I calculate math and evaluate these cards.
And the best players in the world are doing that because it's the basics. If you look at, we bring him up all the time, Easton Douglas is one of the best. He wrote an article on his Patreon that's no longer there, but it was a very good article about how he approaches value. And a lot of the decks, like when he brought Slab Dash, that is a very, like, you need to squeeze value out of that deck, right, to be successful with it. And so, like, if you want to be competitive, you have to know that the people at the highest level are doing this. It's part of the basic skills, but I think sometimes if you frequent the Purple Discord like me, it could be a little overhyped, and it's not the end-all be-all. Yeah, it is. It is. It's still a card game, right? It's not a number. It's not just a numbers game. It is a card game. So
it's information. I mean, information is one of the most important things in any card game.
Yeah,
it always will be.
Okay, let's move on.
This is why sometimes,
No. We'll do 2 hours. I was like, we can't do a full episode on this topic. We definitely could have.
We could have. I told you we could have.
I didn't think we could, man. So the next thing I want to talk about is asking versus answering the question. And what I mean by that is, are you bringing a deck to an armory or tournament that you're putting the pressure on your opponent to be able to respond to the thing that you're doing? A good example, let's see, is Dio. Very obvious what Dio is going to try to do. I'm going to try to blow you up. I'm going to try to hit you with max V, boom grenades. Can you stop this? Is your deck defensive enough to stop this, or offensive enough to kill me before I do this thing? Or are you playing more of like a control deck, or like you're like, hey, I know that the meta is this, and I'm going to bring the counter to this, where you are answering the question. Wes, how important do you think it's better to ask the question or answer the question? And how dependent on that is how new the set is? So, like, in a new set or a new meta, is it better to ask the question or answer the question? Do you think that, like, is it black and white? Is one just better than the other? Is one better for newer players than the other? Like, what's your take on asking versus answering the question? Does it matter, does it matter based on how long a set has been out, or no? Or
So, like you said, when we say ask a question or answer a question, we're essentially asking our opponents either tough in-game decisions, such as against Dio, like, can you stop this boom grenade from hitting you this turn? Or we're asking you tough deck building decisions, and example like that would be like maybe CYB new fatiguing out some decks, such as fatiguing out Dio. In early metas, I think generally card game players are aware that aggro is better, and I think the reason why is because it's harder to answer a question, or answer the question, if you want to phrase it that way, to an unsolved meta, because you don't really know what question you are answering. Such as, like, right now, we know that the top deck to beat is Aurora. So the question that every deck has to answer, if you're a Flesh and Blood competitive player, the question you have to ask yourself is, can I beat Aurora? If not, why am I playing this deck? And there are answers to both of those questions. Like, for example, Enigma is not a particularly good deck into Aurora, but there are valid reasons to play Enigma. So let's say we can go over some examples from recent FAB history. Syndra spiked the very recent PQ events, or RTN events in season, and
which was new in the meta. That was like the meta was not solved yet.
Right.
Syndra was very new. This was the example that I was going to go. So yeah, continue. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. So we had Syndra asking this question, like, do you know how to block a ninja? Essentially, do you know how to block Mask of Momentum? Do you have the capability? That was the in-game decision. The deck building decision, or question, I guess I should say, is, do you have a way to interact with my flick knives? The deck is so built around flick knives burning through one of your blocks that, and getting the resource off of the chess piece, that if you can't answer that question with your deck building, you probably will just lose to Syndra. I mean, it's possible that you're a good enough player to know how to block around it correctly, but like, it's still a very difficult question. Another great example is Slippy. One of our teammates, Dylan, right now, it's mad repping that deck, and one of the reasons it's so good and better than Mario is because every single turn of the game, it will present you with a stealth attack and ask you a question. Can you play around me either juicing this or juicing the next one? Or maybe I don't have an attack reaction at all. Maybe I'm just going to throw one, you overblock, and I throw another one, and you just waste your
pass, psych, the classic.
Yeah, psych, idiot, what are you going to do now? Like, it's asking you a tough in-game decision every turn of the game. Similar in a sense to Dory, where it's like, if you have a defense reaction in your list that you have like played around, now you have an answer to that question. You say, I don't care what you're doing because I can respond to it. I have some interaction I can do here. I don't care if you have that attack react because I'm going to play the sink blow and say, that's a cute attack react. It's still not going to do anything, sort of thing. Fang is another example like that, where it's like once you get into those in-game scenarios where Fang is online, he's going to present the dagger and give you almost no information. So you have to like answer really, really tough blocking decisions, arguably impossible blocking decision on, do I block this one and try not to die, or do I block the next one? And we go back to the deck building considerations, where if you have a defense reaction in that scenario, all of a sudden you have an answer to that question. Some historic examples would be like, since we mentioned Dio, Dash IE is a deck that answered that question. Easton brought Slap Dash, but before Easton even came up with Slap Dash, it already existed. It just didn't have the tech load stuff in it. It was still a deck that people would bring out and ask the question, can you generate enough value to kill me before I get Exodia? Oldhim, shout out to Tuck, massive Oldhim fan. That was a deck that asked you a question, just like New asks the question, can you kill me through my disruption? And Oldhim didn't have life gain, but he had damage prevention, which is
lots of prevention, yeah.
Same Z.
And disruption.
And disruption, yeah. And so that was both a deck building and an in-game decision you had to answer. But anyway, going back to the original part of your question of, is it better in an early meta versus like a solved meta? It's always generally better to ask the question than to answer the question in an unsolved meta, simply because there are lots of deck lists that aren't solved themselves. So how in the world are they going to have a dedicated game plan to you? Like I said earlier, information is massive in card games. Especially in Flesh and Blood, it's a lot of the times more important than the actual math is the information that you have access to. So yeah, so I think definitely if you can ask the question in an early meta, you're in a good spot. That being said, what type of player would want to ask the question versus answer the question in a solved meta? Aggro players are generally asking the question. We are saying, can you stop me from just blowing you up? Do you have the disruption? Do you have the defensiveness? Whatever the case may be, can you stop me from just slapping you in the face repeatedly for however many turns it takes to kill you? Granted, there's an alternative to that. There are the control players like Tuck that like to answer the question. Like, okay, you have this crazy aggro. Here's my answer to it. I'm going to stop you from playing out your whole hand by playing this Channel Lake Frigid or Syndra or whatever the case may be. I'm going to stop you from doing your thing and play Blizzard. It
just feels so good when someone sits down, they get a big smirk in their face, and in their head they're playing a deck where they're like, can you block Mask Momentum? And it's like, yeah, it's so easy. What do you mean? I have this, I have this, I have that. Like, I know what you're going to do. Yeah, of course I can. And then it just feels so satisfying to answer the question in those types of decks. But I do want to build off slightly and say that, although generally, I completely agree that generally, aggro will ask the question and control will answer the question. That's not always the case.
Yep.
So the example that I learned over time as a big Guardian stan was I would compare and contrast Bravo with Oldhim. Bravo asks you a question and is a proactive control. I'm going to send Spinal, Dominate, Pummel, you got to deal with it, you got to play through it, whereas Oldhim was the exact opposite, a reactive control deck that sat there and said, what are you going to do? I'll think once you tell me what you're going to do, and I'll see how I'm going to react. And even though they're both like trying to engage with you in similar ways, they are opposite ends of the ask versus answer spectrum, but they both are control decks. And I can't think of any examples of like an aggro that more answers the question than asks. But I'm sure they exist.
Azalea,
I'm sure
I
they're
would
out
say,
there.
is one of those decks. Azalea
Who?
is, and Ripped
Yeah,
Azalea
absolutely.
is one of those decks.
No.
Yep.
It's a aggressive control deck. The question it is
Can you
answering
deal
is
with big ass dominate?
Yeah.
On hit,
Yeah.
do this, and that.
well, it's not just that. It's answering a question of these aggro decks of can you stop me from dropping my whole hand into you every turn of the game? And Azalea answers that question by
It's
saying,
like,
yes,
oh, yeah, I can.
I'm going to dominate this red in the ledger, and I'm going to tell you you cannot do that. So now
exactly.
you have to have an answer to my dominates sort of thing. So it kind of creates this back and forth. But,
Yeah, they both definitely exist because, like, I would say like CYB New is a control deck that asks a question that's not like a
Yeah,
you're asking like, are you able to, do you have any plan to not get fatigued here, right? Like that's what I'm going to do
Even
this
non-swipe
thing.
you might even
Yeah.
fall into that category because they just want to disrupt every turn, right? New is happy when they're just CNC into leave no and to shake, like all the disruption.
Yeah.
Where they want you on the back foot because the moment they're on the back foot, they're losing, right? So if they have to answer your questions, they're probably not in a good spot in the game, but they can.
Yeah.
If needed.
I like the Syndra example only because we saw so much Syndra success in the beginning, and now it's like Syndra is like
Knowledge check.
not a very good deck. It's like an okay deck.
I think
not
another
bad.
example of that would be Verdance. Verdance saw some success around this time, and then saw a pretty big uptick rather in popularity and play rate, and now has kind of gone back down because people kind of figured out how to play around the deck, what it's trying to do, and have answers to it.
Do you guys agree that? Get Tuck?
This is not anything that's set in stone either. So, for example, I've been saying for weeks that I think Florian is getting worse over time right now because he is doing so well. And it sounds kind of oxymoronic, but I think he is a deck that inherently answers questions. He doesn't ask them. Can you block Syndra? Hell yes, I can. Can you deal with Aurora aggression? Absolutely, I can. But I'm answering questions in a very specific way because that's how my deck has to. So once Aurora start getting more reps into Florians because he won a calling and he top 4 to Battle Harden and here and there, then they know how to ask me the questions better and more efficiently. So now I'm less able to answer them. So although the roles stay the same, because it's a card game and it's constantly developing, and this week the meta is one way and next week it could be entirely different, and everyone's learned and everyone's collectively gotten better. You never know where you're actually going to lie as long as you're not, like, you have to do your homework, you have to stay up to date, whether you're on asking or receiving side of this.
Yeah, because it's, we talked about it a little bit, touched on it, like, it's, some decks I think you do both. Like, a deck that asks a question could also have tech cards that answer a question, right? Like, like Katsu, Cyclone Roundhouse, and things like that. Like, you could put these tech cards in that deal with, or you throw in Reinforce to deal with Bravo, and, like, against certain decks, you're just going to ask the question, but some, like Azalea, if you don't have D-Reacts, you're not going to have a good time.
I would actually argue that is the entire purpose of a sideboard in basically every card game, is to answer a question that a certain deck asks. Like, think of Prism as like a perfect example. It asks, do you have the counter to my keyword Phantasm? And a lot of decks right now, the answer is no. Like Aurora, nah. We ain't got that answer. Some people are starting to tech into it with like Ninth Blades and Blanches and stuff like that, but
sometimes you make your deck worse by trying to answer a question, and it's just Wes, you kind of stole some of my thunder here, bro, because you said you talked about some of it before, but asking your opponent, the player, a question versus asking their deck a question. A good example I would use, we mentioned Florin. And I'm pretty sure his name's Kevin, the fatigue player from Denver that always kind of brings something. He brought like...
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah. I think players like that ask the player the question.
Yeah.
You could be on a fatigue deck. Like Florin likes to play decks, whether it was in CC or in Limited when he played against Wu-Tang, where he's going to kind of try to drag you through the game and not playing a fatigue deck, but like if you don't know as a player how to deal with fatigue, he's going to take advantage of it.
Yeah. The longer game gives your opponent more chances to make a misplay and you to recognize it and capitalize.
Is there is one better than the other? Like if you're asking your opponent's deck Prism, do you have poppers, versus the asking your opponent a skill, like almost like a skill check, like Dory, right? Like, if you don't know how to play against Dory, it feels like Dory is the best deck that ever existed. But as soon as you understand what kind of the cards do and stuff like that, is one better than the other? Are they both good? Like, what is your idea on like asking your player, the person, the question versus asking their deck a question?
Talking about competitive card games, I would assume that we are playing at the highest level, or we should be striving to play at the highest level at the very least. So therefore, I would argue that asking your opponent's deck a question will always be better than asking your opponent a skill question. Because I think it's a bad plan if you go into a tournament and want to assume that your opponents cannot answer a skill question. It will work at like
Day
tier
one?
1 and maybe even tier 2 events and day 1s of those tier 3 events. But once you're like day 2s at a calling, you're a top 8 at a PQ, at RTN, whatever the case may be, those players are going to have those. They're going to be prepared, essentially. They're going to be ready for it. And like deck questions is not something you can just, practice yourself out of. You can have a game plan, but like if we want to talk about silver bullets in the game, like Poison the Well and stuff like that, if you don't have them sometimes, again, like certain decks just kind of need it to beat CYB new. Prism is another example for like a silver bullet type thing. If you don't have poppers and Prism can just run you over with her overstated heralds, there's not a ton you can do just by virtue of being a skilled player. She will just continue to run you over with heralds. And if your deck can't answer that question of can you stop Phantasm, can you introduce the downside to my card text, then you probably just lose. There obviously skill can combat that somewhat, but
So I agree with Wes, but I want to build off of it some more too, and say that especially when you're playing decks like I do that kind of have a longer game plan, not really going aggro super fast, sometimes you can pick up on certain patterns on a player level. Again, I don't care what deck they're playing. I can see that you're doing a certain thing. And case in point, if Wes and I play Guardian versus Prism, versus Wes plays against another random Talishar Guardian on Prism, he is not going to play his Heralds the same way because he knows, or sorry, not Heralds, the Auras. He knows if he drops a Spectre Aura, because we've played for years, I'm going to swing on them immediately. I am not going to wait. I could have like 1,500 damage. I'm going to swing on the Aura and I'm going to pass. And I'll say maybe next turn. And obviously this is because we've known each other for so long. But when you play these long, grindy games, like for example, I got this a lot when I was playing Oldhim versus Dromai, where we would go 50 minutes every single fucking game. And you can really get a feel for if I do this, I bet he's going to do this in response. So instead... And that, I do think, I completely agree that the highest level of skill players, you never want to put them in a situation where they can just kind of outsmart you because you teed them up for the opportunity. But on the flip side, you can definitely, like, you're playing cards, but you're playing your opponent sometimes too. And that was part of what made me love Oldhim. Some decks don't really do this so much, some kind of do. But it is just another factor in all of this big old context that is driving all of your decisions.
Katsu's a great example back in the day. I would always pay attention to how quickly they blocked the second Kodachi.
Yeah.
And if they are just trained, you always block the second. You bet your ass I am going to send 2 Kodachis every single turn. And it's like, I've had opponents block the second Kodachi when I'm on Pouncing Links. Because they're just so... you know what I mean? Not a good player. That's not a good player. But I like you can kind of ask your opponent these questions in a subtle way.
The same answer over and over.
And you're like, oh, I can take advantage of this. I'm going to take advantage.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There's plenty of people at like day 1, day 2 of things when I was playing Katsu. And if I like, it's also the speed at which they would just put a card down. And I'm like, oh, you are never going to let... this, okay, I'm taking a card every single time with this. Like, you're making my hands better. Like, so much better by just playing that way. So, I like that. So, you can gain more points into any kind of matchup if you're able to kind of subtly ask your opponent these questions in a game, but asking the question of the deck is just a better game plan because you have to kind of assume if you're competitive. It's like Carlos and
played to a bad opponent, played to a good opponent.
Yes, Carlos and Dylan had this conversation with Kano where Carlos had asked Dylan about like people disrespecting Kano, and he was like, day one you'll be fine. Day two, people like you're like the best players are not bringing AB. Yeah. You know what I mean? Things like that. So,
yep.
Do you guys think a newer player? Say again.
That was the case in Memphis too. When I was there, I was walking the day two calling tables, and it was covered with Kano, and none of them made top 8 if I remember right.
That and then, like right, it's like a day one strategy or get to day two strategy, not like a win day two strategy. If you're doing that, because you have to assume that by day two you have the best players in that room, and asking the opponent a question is like you can only take that so far. Yeah.
Answer the question.
Yeah, you can only take that so far. Do you guys think that newer players should be on decks that ask a question of their opponent's deck simply because go into the game and you have this game plan, and if you do it, sometimes you'll win. If you don't, do you not? I see Tuck, you're shaking your head.
No, I personally, if there's someone who's like, hey, I'm getting into Flesh and Blood, I know the rules, but like I want to get better, I would say I'm a new player, but I want to take the game more seriously and understand it. I personally would recommend a deck like Bravo, KO, Azalea, one of these that it will just teach you fundamentals and all the stuff we've already talked about in the video, where you need to know how to evaluate your math, you need to be able to feel that when you make a mistake, that there are consequences and here's why, and you could have done this instead. And I think these simpler decks do a really good job of teaching the fundamentals. So like I would never recommend a new player go jump on Kano or New, because holy crap. But if you evaluate like an Enthos for 6 versus blocking for 3 and 3, this is good. I would almost call it training wheels math and training wheels fundamentals heroes, where I would personally recommend any of those to a new player. Then if you're past that point, you go, okay, I've done that, I've got good fundamentals, now I'm ready to like enter a tournament, then probably yes.
Wes,
but
you
new
agree?
player specifically, I would say no.
The question was, would I recommend a new player play a deck that asks a question rather than answer a question?
Yeah.
I think in general, it depends on the question. Like, would I recommend a new player play CYB? No, absolutely not. Would I recommend a player play Syndra? Absolutely. So those are both decks that sort of ask a question. I would argue, actually, I think we talked about CYB New earlier instead of just asking a question.
Yeah.
I think I would actually argue that CYB New answers a question rather than asks one first. But it is a bit of both. Yeah. But I think CYB as a tech card is generally an answer to a question rather than asking a question. Although Fatigue as a strategy kind of asks your opponent a skill check. Yeah. It's like a skill check, sort of thing. But I think in general, if you are asking a question with an aggro deck as a new player, that would be a spot I would want to be in. I don't want to have to know the ins and outs of every single other deck when I'm new to the game. I just want to play a good deck and see why it's good and see how other players play around it, sort of thing. I think would be a spot I would want to be in personally. But again, I'm definitely an aggro player. So.
They're both. I think both those things that you guys said are like spot on, right, and not the same. Because like back in the day, I thought FI was like that way, right? You'll take games off of some players that are better than you just because you blow them up. And like you're just like go in with this simple game plan of like I'm going to do this, but then I also think like I didn't really know it until Tuck said it. But then FI is also fits that same bill that you just said, where it's like it's a good math deck and will teach you the fundamentals of some of this stuff, and that's interesting because I feel like newer players sometimes come in and they want to learn Kano, and it's like. Man, like yeah, but it's
I wouldn't recommend it.
No, you're just like I think you're setting yourself. It's doomed.
Are they coming from like another card game, or are they like new to card games entirely? Obviously, all of this is like someone might come into Flesh and Blood and sit down and go, oh, "Okay, this makes sense. I can evaluate that. No problem." But yeah, I wouldn't recommend.
I mean, Carlos is a good example, and Carlos is not a new player. Carlos is a very good card player, and even Carlos now is like, I want to get off Kano because I actually want to learn how to be a better general Flesh and Blood player. And if you want to be a good Flesh and Blood player, and you're just starting, like Kano is not you can have a lot of success on Kano, and like shout out Majin and all the people that love Majin and stuff like that, and the Wizard enthusiasts out there. But like, I know how like enticing it could be to come into a card game like Flesh and Blood. You get blown up by Kano, and you're like, oh my god, I want to do that. I want to play Solitaire. But then like, if Kano LLs or Kano's just not good into the meta, you're not taking what you learned from that deck and then being able to apply it to other Flesh and Blood decks in a way that you will be successful at the game of actual Flesh and Blood, right?
No, famously, our local Kano player in the Springs years ago, I think he played for like a year locally, and then one day shouted, "Wait, what's an attack reaction?" And it was a good day.
Yeah, frequently didn't.
Also, shout out to the local Briar player that didn't know you could choose the order of your pitch stack.
Because never pitched.
But this is like what I'm saying. This is what I mean, right? Like
you legitimately never put a card on the bottom of your deck. It was just Cheerios. So I don't blame him for not knowing, but it was really, really funny as like an Oldham player hearing that.
I knew you could as Katsu, but it never mattered. Every time I hit my hero power, I'm shuffling. So it's nice to play.
It's not quite true. You do bottom a card as Briar. You got a bottom Nurse card to channel Mouth Heroic, right?
True. I guess you do play E-Strike too.
Yeah, but that against one card, you don't have an option, right? It's just it's goes on the bottom. It's whatever, right?
It says Earth card go. Okay.
There's certain heroes that do not play like fundamental Flesh and Blood that are not. Like they're good for once you understand the game to then pick up, so you can understand why they're good. Whereas it's like such an uphill battle to learn a complex hero, and then it's another uphill battle to learn why they're in this weird niche that they're in and how they interact with the actual game of Flesh and Blood, as opposed to magical wizard land. Like it's multiple different beasts that you have to tackle, and it's not how I would recommend anyone learn Flesh and Blood.
Carlos is going to be a killer, though. I mean, he's already a very good card player. It's just it was interesting to me that after doing the Kano thing and having a lot of success after he took time off. I mean, he came back to RTN season. I think he top 8'd like quite a few of the RTNs that he played after like a year off.
Yep, kicked my ass and kicked Wes's ass.
Yeah, made everyone in Springs all of a sudden be like, "Yo, we gotta bring our AB back. Like Carlos is gonna be there." And then for him to
gets kicking and screaming.
And then he to be like, "I'm gonna put Kano down for a little bit. I want to learn these other decks because I just want to be a better Flesh and Blood player." Like that dude is gonna be he's gonna be a killer. I like. It was just very eye opening that I think more people should do it that way as well. If I see so many people that just start playing and they want to play these like fringe decks that play outside of the rules of Flesh and Blood, where it's like you might be able to take games off of your opponent that doesn't bring AB, but like you're not really going to be a good Flesh and Blood player that way. You might be a good Kano player, but those two things are not the same.
I would still just in general encourage anyone, like even the people who are listening who have been playing Flesh and Blood for 2, 3, 4 years, I would encourage to play more and different decks. Like I really think like how Dan learned Enigma and how he started to learn to evaluate things playing Enigma was influenced by your background of Katsu and Dio and all that, or like for me it's influenced by Florian and Oldham, and so sometimes I'll play Aurora and y'all will tell me, stop blocking so much, it's your damn Guardian influence, and vice versa. And I think it just, how can you be good at a game when you only play 1 or 2 of the 40 things in the game?
Yeah.
Not to mention the benefits of sitting across from it and going, oh, I know what to do now, I know your deck inside and out, I got your number. It's just so satisfying, especially at the tournament level. It's
fucked up, because when we did the Katsu thing, I played against you guys, and I was like, man, I'm taking a lot of games off people because they just don't know how to play against. And then I started playing against you guys, and we did the deep dive, and whether you played Katsu or didn't after that, I was like, there was like several times where both of you guys, Wes is like the best at this, but you guys would be like, I would just play Surging, and he'd be like, okay, so if I don't let this hit, it's this, and then if I do, you probably have the whelming already. And I'm like, motherfucker, is there a mirror behind me? Because he'll say these things out loud, and Wes, I hate when you do it because it's almost always correct, and I'm like, dude, this guy's looking through my cards. This is like messed up. Every time he starts to do that talk, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Every time he's like, okay, so if you did it this way, it's because you probably have this in your arsenal, and I'm like, motherfucker.
It's because Katsu's asking the question, what's in my hand, and you always have the answer.
Yeah, it was impossible to play against you guys after that shit, man. It was so hard. It was like, stop doing this.
This is why I wish they would interconnect Katsu's lines more, so that this could go into either of those two, and that could go into either of those two.
That'd
So
be
because
really cool.
that's why it's predictable. Because if you leave a surging, there's only 2 follow-ups. I guess 3 now, but one of them is underwhelming Gust Wave. So there's 2 follow-ups.
But it's just knowing that, like, going through the lines of, like, if this hits, you grab this, but if you already have it, then you do. And then, like, perfectly blocking around my line.
Yeah, only
like,
because we have
cool.
Deck and we know,
Yeah, awesome. This is great. This is a lot of fun.
If y'all
like I
ever
said-
lose to Florian, I'm disappointed. I'm let down.
Like I said, it goes back to the information is just king in card games. It always will be.
Yep.
This was fun. This was awesome. I'm glad we touched on these 2 topics. Selfishly, I wanted to do this, but also coming back after a year off, it made a lot of sense. And then our scene is growing so much.
Yeah.
The spring, it's
regularly.
insane, and it's like a revolving door. We got new players, and then they're bringing their homies, and then they're bringing. It is so much fun to do this, and I think most of the people that are watching this are our locals and stuff like that. And I just wanted to do something like this that. If you're a newer player and you're not, super into the idea of value or asking the question or what decks you should start to learn or what decks you should, if you want to be better at a game, I think this episode touched on all of that, and the 2 topics were completely unrelated but had crossover. So, thank you guys for doing this. I appreciate it. And again, watch the Nathan Crawford. Watch all 3 episodes on the Learning Curve. It's so good.
Link is in the description. Just go watch it.
It is so good.
All of their content is really good for that matter.
Yeah, there's like
I love the player. They have really good content.
Yeah, and shout out to Dylan. Dylan's getting coached by Nathan Crawford. That guy's going to be a beast.
A monster. I'm scared. I'm worried.
He's going to be a monster. He's going into that. I can't wait to see. This would come out after that episode that I did with Dylan too, so it makes a lot more sense. But yeah, he's gonna tear Nats up, man. It's gonna be fun. So are you guys. While me and Peter are at
Dylan
the.
always does really well at those tournaments too. So now that he's
shout out to Mark
for real,
Yeah.
he's gonna go crazy, dude.
The Arthur fist.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, hell yeah. Any closing thoughts? Any shout outs? Anything up and coming that's exciting for either of you guys?
SGG-Con this weekend. Be on the lookout for one of us to top 8 and win. 2 PQ pluses this weekend. I'm sure we'll take down both, no question.
Let's go.
And then we'll put some deck tech on it after.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. I appreciate you guys.
Stay tuned for the sick Enigma deck tech. Also, Necromancer will have content on our channel in the coming months, so stay tuned for that. Check out the mobile app FaB Life. Also, shout out to Iron Lion Collectibles, our sponsor, our local game store. Thank you, Iron Lion Collectibles. I encourage every player to think about the macro game. Play a deck that goes to Cycle 2. Just do it. Just get some games on Talishar and actively think about what you're pitching, the order you're pitching them in, preserving threat density, all of that. You will be a better player. And if you already do that, then go play an aggro deck. Do the opposite. And don't just block.
Dude, you've had oh my god. You've had so much success doing this. It's wild.
I feel like I've grown a lot as a player.
It is
just doing what I said. Just play more things. Just play more different things.
Wes, how proud are you when
you can talk to them about it?
How proud are you when you saw Tuck take top 4 at the last thing on Aurora, bro? It's crazy. It's crazy. Oh no, I'm just saying, like, to watch him play, to watch this guy play an aggro deck and have like success and have fun on it. Oh my god, a tear dropped out of him. I was like, hell yeah.
I gotta say, I was more proud though. Oh, go ahead.
I would argue going aggro and doing just here's the best math, dump my hand, is easier than some of these other macro things. So if you can do the macro stuff, the other will come naturally. And that's why I would encourage everyone to play a macro hero like Florian, like Bravo, whoever you want. There's so many options. But
hell yeah.
Better at Flesh and Blood, play more decks.
Yeah, and shout out to the Meta Monday videos, man. I'm excited for this, Wes. That video's sick. I can't wait.
See my thoughts as a jack of all trades, somebody who plays pretty much not every hero, but most of the heroes in the game. Check those out. I share my thoughts. A lot of it is influenced by my teammates, but I'll do my best to give you my version of the truth.
Hell yeah.
So we'll see.
We're going to keep these episodes rolling. I appreciate you guys. If you guys have any ideas or topics you want us to cover, leave it in the comments. Watch the TCG videos, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace!